There's a destination that every overgiver arrives at eventually. It doesn't matter how strong they are, how much they believe in the goodness of people, or how many times they tell themselves that this time will be different. The road always leads to the same place, and when they get there, they barely recognize themselves. It's not burnout, although burnout is part of it. It's not depression, although it looks like depression from the outside. It's something deeper, something that Carl Jung identified as a complete collapse of the false self, the version of the person that was built entirely around being needed. And what Jung discovered about this collapse is that it's not a breakdown, it's a reckoning. The moment when the giver's psyche finally refuses to sustain a pattern that has been slowly killing them from the inside out. Jung spent decades observing people who organized their entire identity around service to others. What he found was remarkably consistent. These individuals would function at extraordinary levels for years, sometimes decades. They'd be the person everyone called in a crisis, the one who remembered birthdays, who showed up without being asked, who carried emotional weight that would have crushed anyone else. They seemed inexhaustible. And then one day, without warning, the engine stopped. Not gradually, not with a slow decline. It stopped like a light switch being flipped. The person who once had infinite patience suddenly had none. The person who always answered the phone stopped picking it up. The person who made everyone else feel safe couldn't get out of bed. And the people around them, the ones who had been receiving all that generosity for years, stood there stunned, asking what happened to you. What happened is what always happens when a system runs on fuel. It was never designed to burn. Jung recognized that overgivers operate on a specific psychological fuel. It's not genuine generosity, although it feels like it. It's a deep unconscious belief that their worth is conditional, that they are only valuable when they are useful, that love must be earned through sacrifice, and the moment they stop sacrificing, the love disappears. This belief usually forms in childhood. The child learns that affection comes when they perform, when they're helpful, when they're quiet about their own needs and attentive to everyone else's. They learn that having needs is a burden, that asking for help is weakness, and that the safest way to guarantee connection is to make yourself indispensable. Jung called this the development of a compensatory persona. The child builds an elaborate mask of selflessness that serves two functions. First, it secures attachment with caregivers who only offered conditional love. Second, it buries the child's authentic needs so deep that they eventually forget those needs exist. The mask works. It works so well that the child carries it into adulthood and builds an entire life around it. They choose partners who take more than they give. They attract friendships that are functionally one-directional. They take jobs where they're overworked and undervalued. And at every turn they tell themselves, this is just who I am. I'm a giver, I don't need much. But the body keeps score. Jung observed that the unconscious mind tracks every unmet need, every swallowed request, every moment the person abandoned themselves to serve someone else. And it stores these as psychic debt. The debt accrues silently. For years, the overgiver feels nothing but a vague tiredness, a low-grade resentment they immediately feel guilty about, a creeping sense that something is missing, but they can't name what. Then, the debt comes due. The collapse happens when the psychic debt exceeds the person's capacity to suppress it, and it manifests in ways that terrify the overgiver because it contradicts everything they believe about themselves. They become bitter. They feel rage toward the very people they've spent years nurturing. They look at their relationships and see, with sudden devastating clarity, how one-sided everything has been. They realize that the people they gave everything to wouldn't cross the street for them. And that realization doesn't arrive as sadness, it arrives as fury. Jung found this rage to be one of the most important moments in the overgiver's psychological life, because this rage is the authentic self finally breaking through the compensatory persona. It's the real person, the one who was buried under decades of performative selflessness, screaming, "I exist. I have needs. I matter." And the overgiver doesn't know what to do with this rage because they've never been allowed to be angry. Anger was for other people. Their role was to absorb anger, to de-escalate, to smooth things over. To feel rage themselves is to violate every rule they've internalized about who they're supposed to be. This is the crossroads Jung considered the most critical in the overgiver's journey, because at this point, two paths open. The first path is suppression. The overgiver gets frightened by their own anger, feels guilty about their resentment, and shoves everything back down. They apologize for pulling away. They resume their old patterns. They convince themselves they were just tired, just stressed, just going through a phase. And the cycle resets, except now the debt is even larger. The body is even more depleted, and the next collapse will be worse. Much worse. The second path is what Jung called integration. The overgiver allows the rage to exist without acting on it destructively and without suppressing it. They sit with the devastating truth that their generosity was never purely generous. It was a transaction. Love in exchange for usefulness. Connection in exchange for self-abandonment. Safety in exchange for the erasure of their own needs. This truth is brutal. It dismantles the overgiver's entire self-image. They can no longer see themselves as the selfless one, the good one, the one who loves without conditions. They have to confront the fact that their giving had conditions all along. The condition was reciprocity that never came. The condition was love that was never returned at the same depth. The condition was being seen as worthy, and the people they gave to never held up that mirror. Jung observed that overgivers who choose integration go through a grief process that looks nothing like what anyone expects. They don't grieve the people they lost. They grieve the person they never got to be. The version of themselves who had boundaries from the beginning, who said no without guilt, who let people sit with their own discomfort instead of rushing in to fix it, who chose relationships based on mutual respect rather than desperate need to be needed. They mourn all the years spent performing a version of love that was really just fear dressed up in generous clothing. But what emerges on the other side of this grief is someone entirely new, an overgiver who has stopped overgiving, not because they've become selfish, but because they've finally learned the difference between generosity and self-destruction. They still give, but they give from overflow, not from deficit. They give with open hands, not with the desperate grip of someone who's terrified that letting go means being abandoned. Jung found that these transformed givers develop a capacity for genuine love that the old version never had. Because the old version wasn't really loving people, it was managing them, keeping them close through service so they wouldn't leave. The new version can love without agenda, can give without keeping score, can connect without losing themselves in the process, because they've finally built something the old version never had, a self-worth protecting. You didn't end up here because you loved too much. You ended up here because you loved in a way that left no room for you. And Jung would tell you that this place, this exhausted, angry, disillusioned place that feels like the end of everything, is actually the beginning. The beginning of a life where your love includes yourself, where your generosity has limits, where your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to sacrifice. You're not broken, you're waking up. And the people who preferred you asleep will call this a tragedy, but Jung would call it the most important thing that ever happened to you.